Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask a hell of a lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill by visiting patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. And there you can, contribute and be a bitter pill and get some stickers. We got freshly toasted stickers for you, and they look awesome. If you like the band Husker Du, that was the kind of artwork I was going for because I'm old. And those guys were, of my generation. So there you go. Tonight, we've got a guest that I'm really excited to talk to. We're going to talk about quite a few things tonight, especially in the realm of education. Dr. Sharmaine Browne is a professor of liberal arts at Savannah College of Art and Design. She's also taught at CUNY and NYU. She is done research in the effects of architectural technologies on culture and individuals, the potential role of language and the humanities in public policy, media studies, and human rights. And she focuses on abject figures, those individuals who are marginalized or exploited by larger institutions and forces. So that being said, we're going to jump right into it. Dr. Browne, are you there?
I'm here.
I love calling you Dr. Browne. I've known you for a million years, but I love calling you Dr. Browne. That's just cool.
I like it. It's fun.
So let's before we jump into some of the stuff we talked about, let's let the listeners know who you are. Let's get into kind of where you're from and how you ended up where you're at.
Okay. Well, I'm living in Savannah, Georgia for the first time. I've always been living on the East Coast or the West. I guess I'm a Californian who spent as much time in New York as I have in California. I just got a job as a full-time professor at Savannah College of Art and Design, which is very exciting for me. And before that, I was working at Hunter College in New York. And as you mentioned, I worked at CUNY. I taught at NYU. I've worked as an adjunct for years while I was finishing my degree. And I'm very passionate about educators in this country, and how we treat them, what we think about them, and making their situation a lot more transparent than it is.
Well, and I'm glad you said. I'm glad you kind of brought up a difference between what you were doing before. Now you're full-time professor in at Savannah, correct?
Yes.
And so, what's the difference between? Excuse me. What's the difference between that, say, and what you were doing at CUNY and NYU?
Well, it's interesting because as an educator, as a professor in the classroom, it's not different. I dedicate my heart, my time, my research to, being the best teacher I can be, to supporting my students and doing all that kinds of work. So it's a really good question. What's the difference between a full-time professor and an adjunct lecturer or an adjunct professor? In terms of the effort you put in, there's really no difference at all. What is really different is how you're treated, whether or not you make a living wage, whether or not you have the facilities available to you to do the best job that you can without overcoming huge hurdles, enormous challenges, and a lot of, demoralizing conditions, which is what a lot of adjunct lecturers, assistant professors, and adjunct professors at large have to deal with at most schools in our country, unfortunately.
Okay, and I want to jump into that a little bit because I'm in Austin, Texas now. I've been living here about 3.5 years, and Austin's kind of a giant college town, and so I never met as many professors as I have. I think I've maybe met 10 professors my whole life living in LA, and here I've probably met like 50. You go to bar and you run into somebody chit chat. What do you do? Oh, I teach at UT. Oh, okay. And they're an adjunct, right? And so let's talk about that a little bit. Like what kind of pay and not to be so base, but let's face it, we all have to make a living. But what kind of pay are we talking about for an adjunct professor before we get into, say, tenure positions? And I don't want to ask you your salary personally, but I'm just saying it's probably a lot better than what you're doing as an adjunct. But what kind of pay and hours are these people expected to deal with?
Well, the pay is pretty astonishing. So the median pay for most adjuncts has been, for the last several years, about $2,700 per course. A course that's usually about 16 weeks long. And It's funny. An adjunct is technically paid for the hours that they teach. And what we don't always take into account or necessarily understand is that the hours we teach in the classroom, that is just a fraction of the hours we put into that particular class. So, I mean, at $2,700 for one course for 16 weeks, it's about $137, I think, or so per week.
It's about one. I just pulled out my phone. It's $169. Like, Jesus Christ.
Okay, for as many as 30 hours of work, depending on that particular week. I've been asking around, and I got a ballpark of how much money most adjuncts make per class. Some people make, in terms of who I talked to, as much as $3,500 for the 16 weeks per class. And I did talk to somebody who was paid as little as $2,200 for a 16-week course.
Jesus.
Which, is outrageous when you think about how much work goes in. I mean, really, most people don't understand how much work goes into teaching a class. You spend weeks, if not months, preparing for the class. You do research. You have to do all the reading that you assign. You, of course, have had to do yourself. You have to invest, if you have time and support from your institution. You have to invest in pedagogical training, meaning, how do I teach well? What do I do in a classroom? It's not so easy to just step into a class and teach. Mm-hmm. You have to prepare your lesson. Some people will spend hours preparing a lesson plan before a particular class. Not to mention teaching people how to do something like, say, write an essay. That's a lot of work, plus grading all those essays. And unfortunately, some of the writing-intensive courses will have as many as 30 students in one classroom. So you have to give each one of those students some attention. You have to give each one of those students a lot of feedback. Reading itself takes hours and hours and hours of work, especially if you actually want to be an effective instructor and you want the students to get something out of the class. You have office hours, and I can't even tell you how many emails you have to respond to now. And that's a big, big difference in our new digital verse. How often you're interacting with your students. It's a lot more than it was even just a few years ago. So people don't, and that's. I read it in the New Yorker, a very interesting article. It was written a couple of years ago called "Oh, Adjunct My Adjunct" by Carmen Mercado.
Wait, repeat the title. I'm sorry. Repeat the title again.
It's a 2015 New Yorker article entitled "Oh, Adjunct My Adjunct."
Oh, okay.
And author was Carmen Maria Mercado, and she has a great quote in there. And this is her quote: "There is a complicated culture of silence that surrounds adjuncting." And I don't think I've ever read anything that sums it up quite so well. It's a culture of silence. Adjuncts will suffer in silence before actually being transparent about the way they're being treated or how much they're not being paid. Administrators are silent on the topic of adjuncts more often than not. And frankly, unfortunately, even full-time tenured professors are generally fairly silent for the most part because there's a bit of shame there, because we all know how the adjuncts are treated.
Right. Well, and then, I mean, when you decided to want to teach college, back when you decided this, it was a much more quote unquote respectable profession, right? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, college professors were kind of looked up to, like, wow, that's a cool gig, and then they had some, bit of status, because it wasn't $1 million a year, but it was definitely respectable. You made a living, you supported a family, and you did meaningful work. And now it just seems like, people are being paid minimum wage to do everything that you just said.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm reading more and more that adjuncts are the new fast food workers and being treated and paid as such. It's a funny thing. I think the students still give all professors that same respect because the students being in the classroom themselves recognize that this is meaningful work. But what I've come to understand over the last decade or so is that most students have absolutely no idea what kind of conditions adjuncts are working under. In fact, when I sort of outed the situation to one class I had a couple of years ago, and students were literally in shock. They were in shock when they heard about how much adjuncts were paid. Because, frankly, what ends up happening is that when you're working at 3 or 4 campuses, which some adjuncts do, or 2 or 3, which commonly most adjuncts do, when you do not have your own office, when you do not have facilities, even access to a photocopy machine, when you sometimes don't have access to proper computer equipment, you're not as available. You cannot be as available to your students as you would be able to be if you were a tenure-track professor. Students will notice that, and they'll say, I can't get a hold of this professor, this other professor won't write me back, and this is what launched this conversation. And the sympathy and the empathy and the outrage that I heard that day was heartening because, I know that students do give their professors the respect for the work their professors put in, but they don't know. They have absolutely no idea, and that's why this culture of silence is so disturbing. I had an office mate at my old job who, I do not exaggerate, regularly graded through the night in the school because she would stay in her. We had 32 people sharing one office. So the nighttime was the one time when she would have the office to herself with her computer and her desk. And she would sit there all night. I would come back in the morning and she'd still be at her desk, having just taken like a 1-hour nap in her chair. And then she also worked part-time. And she had been adjuncting at the school and doing an incredible job for years and was recently just denied a promotion after earning her PhD.
Wow. Wow.
This is an incredibly, and when I talk about her, I'm talking about many adjuncts, an incredibly dedicated person who loves her students, who wants her students to excel, who's willing, despite getting paid a fraction of what she's worth, still puts all that time in above and beyond what people would expect or even guess.
Okay.
And then
go ahead.
Doesn't get promotion, which should have just been perfunctory. It should have been, it used to be, there was a time not too long ago, and it's still this case in school. If you finish the PhD, you get the promotion. It's not a big promotion, but it's a promotion from adjunct lecturer to assistant adjunct professor.
Right. Well, and that kind
of... to me,
well, and this well, here's the thing. So, I'm sorry, say that again?
I said, to me, that's disrespect on the part of the administration.
Well, 100%. And that was going to be my next question. So all this, obviously college tuitions have gone up. The states and the Fed are funding less and less. People love to tell me that I want a pony when I say that, we should have free education. I have to remind them that I'm 55 years old and I went to Cal Poly for free. I paid $100 a quarter, which is basically free. My books cost more than my tuition. My cousin, who's older than us, went to UCLA for free, and it wasn't because he was special or amazing, because if you meet my cousin, he's not special or amazing. But he went to UCLA for free. He went to UCLA Law School for free because in the UC charter, the first paragraph, it says that students will not pay tuition. And it's still there, ironically enough, even though they charge you now $6,000 a quarter to go to that school. My old school was $5,000 a quarter. And it was $100 a quarter. I got out of school 30 years ago. It's not a million years ago. So what happened? It wasn't a big mystery. So with all this money coming in, with all these tuitions going up, and I'm leaving out the private schools for obvious reasons, but the state schools and the UCs and the UTs and the techs of the world, or Virginia Techs and whatever, those are state-run schools, and yet they're charging an arm and a leg. I can't get an 18-year-old kid a car loan, right? But I can get him a $100,000 student loan, creating an ersatz austerity, really. Where does this money go?
I've been asking that question for a long time because, to be honest, the answers that have presented themselves seem so unreasonable, I guess. That I've myself been sort of caught up in the kind of denial state of mind. Frankly, most of the money, or a lot of the money anyway, seems to be going into administrative costs. My understanding is that the only position growing faster than, say, educators' positions within universities across the country are administrative positions. Administrations are growing and growing and growing, and they're adding more and more and more jobs, and the salaries are going up and up and up.
In the administrative positions, you're saying? In the administrative position.
Okay. Now, this is something I've actually become really interested in, because I still, even given that, it's beyond me how so much money could be going into administrative costs. I do know, of course, that we're improving facilities in campuses across the country. We're building new science facilities. All the STEM fields are getting funded pretty well. We have a lot of money being invested in new technologies. But even with all that, the best facilities are being built at the private schools, not necessarily at all the public institutions. And at a place like CUNY, where you have so many two-year schools, you're not seeing it in the facilities. You're not seeing these great, big, wonderful facilities. So where is that money going? I mean, this is a good question. We need to really ask ourselves, what are we doing with all this money? That was the question my students asked. Why is my tuition so high? Many of them ask us. If that money is not going to my professors, if my professors are being paid so poorly that some of them are having to work at multiple campuses, if some of them don't even have offices. I mean, I've read stories of adjuncts having office hours in the cars because they don't have access to an office. As I said, the office I was in, I was sharing with 31 other adjuncts. It wasn't a huge place.
Did you say 31?
Yeah, there were 32 of us in an office.
Right, okay.
Which last year was cut in half so that half of that office could be given to one full-timer.
That's amazing. Okay, so what percentage would you say of an average college budget, and again, leave private schools out of it, let's just stick with the state schools, what percentage would you say is dedicated to administration?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how to ask.
Well, like how many? What percentage of new hires would you say are admin?
Oh, more than half. That's my guess.
Excuse me?
I would say probably more than half.
More than half. Okay. Well, okay, and the reason I asked this question is because this wasn't the case when we were kids, right? You didn't see $1 million a year presidents at a state school, right? With all their housing paid for, whatever. I mean, maybe if they were the dean of they were the regent guy at UC or the Cal State regent guy, okay, fine. But the president of the college proper, didn't get $1 million salary, and and we didn't have these celebrity professors come teach courses to eat up, however much they get paid to come teach it. Like Matthew McConaughey's teaching drama here at UT, right? And I can't imagine what they're paying him. I mean, and this is the thing where the money, you've got these quasi-professional teams bringing in television rights and, gate receipts, and I mean, Texas Tech up in Lubbock. Lubbock is a little tiny town, 200,000 people. They've got this powerhouse football team. Well, not this season, but they got this huge football team, TV rights, the whole 9 yards. I think their stadium holds 70,000 people, usually 3/4 full at every home game, at about $30 to $150 a piece to get in. I mean, I'm going to see a UT game here in a couple of weeks. Me and my buddy got nosebleed seats for $20, and we're up in heaven. If you want to sit down toward the 50-yard line, it's like $200. And I'm like, dude, which is fine. You get what you pay for. I get it, but where's that money going to? We're paying our coach here, I think, almost $5 million a year, and then the TV rights and everything else. And yet these kids are paying $5-6 grand a semester. It's $4,800 base. If you pay for labs, it's more. If you get a lab, and so you're sitting there kind of going, all right, well, I mean, at what point does it not dawn on people? Like, guys my age are so dense when I'm talking to them. I got to remind them. I go, where'd you go to school? Oh, Texas State. I went to UT. What were you paying? Do you remember? Oh, like $200 a semester. Okay, it's not $200 a semester at Texas State anymore, man. Like, so what? Where do you see this resolving itself? Does it resolve itself?
Well, two things need to change. One, adjuncts need to start advocating for themselves by refusing the job, which is almost an impossible request because adjuncts are no longer. It's funny you mentioned McConaughey. It used to be that that an adjunct professor, a contingent member of the faculty, was usually a professional elsewhere, and would come and teach a course, would lecture, would lend their expertise to the university for the benefit of the students. This is what the position was created for at one time.
Right.
Now, more than 70% of all the professors at most universities are non-tenure track, and about 50% of those are adjunct. In some departments, like the department I was teaching in for a few years, 79% of our faculty in our department, we were all adjunct.
So 80% of the 80% of the professors in your department were adjunct professors.
Yes, at one school. It was a private school at which I was teaching, but yes. And it's across the board. It's nationwide. So as long as you have people who are going to fill those positions, it's going to be very difficult to have any kind of reform. But the second part of that is we need to start talking about it differently, and we need to start using different language. And we're all complicit in this. For instance, I say, I got a job, and I'm really excited. What I really mean is, I got a full-time job with a living wage, and I'm happy. That doesn't mean as an adjunct I didn't have a job. In fact, as an adjunct, you teach more classes, you get paid a third the money, and we say you need to get a job. I mean, I'm talking about within the academy. I'm talking about among educators. So we need to start changing the language, and if we begin changing the language, then maybe that will kind of like carry that emotional feeling of, wait a minute, I'm really being mistreated here. So many people who get into this field because they really care. They're passionate about their subject. They're passionate about their students. They're passionate about education. So, I mean, we're the most vulnerable population in that sense. It's very easy to prey upon people who are doing what they do because they care. So how is it going to get resolved? Adjuncts are going to have to take a step back. But when I say that, I mean, what do you do? What do you do if you're a graduate student and you're trying to finish your PhD? No matter what field you're going to go into, you're probably going to need to adjunct to pay your way through graduate school. Remember, a lot of adjuncts are paying tuition themselves.
Right. They don't go for free.
Yeah, not everywhere. And, if you're living in a city, if you're living in California, if you're living in New York, I know the cost of living far exceeds anything you're going to make. So you really have to work double and triple time.
Right.
You have to sometimes commute 2 hours in one direction for the first part of your day, and then commute 2 hours in another direction for the second part of your day.
Right.
And, it's a good question. How does this resolve itself? We also need more accountability. There are issues of corruption. There are issues in which administrations are using funds in ways that are not necessarily beneficial to the students or the colleges themselves or the universities themselves,
right?
Such as redecorating administrative offices. That money could probably be used to the adjuncts.
Well, that being said, let me ask you a question though. Doesn't some of that stem, which no pun intended, to get into my next question actually, doesn't that kind of come from isn't it easy to prey upon these people that you said, for example, it's easy to prey upon people who care, right? You just said that. Isn't it easy to do that in a culture that's sort of disdains intellectual pursuits. I mean, we have become such an anti-intellectual culture over the last, like, say, 40 years, really with the advent of Reagan. And Nixon kind of started it. But really with Reagan, it became this whole egghead thing. And there's just this disdain for anything intellectually based, like fuck the humanities, right? STEM, right. You see politicians running all if they want to major in something practical, then we'll pay for it. But if they want to major in fucking English, well, then they can just kind of pay for it on their own. Before, college wasn't even necessary. I remember coming up in the 70s, 80s, my friends' dads, worked for Xerox or whatever. If they worked at the food chain, my friend's dad retired from Pacific Bell when it was Ma Bell back in the day, and when he finally retired from Pac Bell, he was like a VP of something or other. I remember when I was a kid in high school, he said, "Hey, listen, if you don't want to go to college, I can get you a job, taking change out of phone booths in a little cart." And then you could work your way, up, right? And I almost took him up on it because I didn't want to go to college. I didn't even take the SAT because I wasn't going to go I didn't want to go to college. My girlfriend at the time talked me into going. And I had a couple of girlfriends that talked me into staying, and one talked me into graduating. So it's all these women in my life. But that was the nature of the way it was. Only people that went to college were teachers and lawyers and doctors. You didn't need college to go sell Xerox machines. You didn't need a degree to go work for Oracle in sales. And now you do. So we place this emphasis on the degree, but then we took all the philosophy out of it. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, you're making a lot of sense.
It's all science and no philosophy. I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't be necessary. Nobody should have to go to college. Most of the generations who came before us were able to get good jobs. They were able to build their craft. They were able to, go out there, work hard, make enough money to raise a family, to do anything that they wanted to do. Yes, they had to work very hard. But we did make college a requirement. And yet, you're saying we took all the philosophy out of it. We took all of the thoughtfulness, the rumination, or we didn't take it out. We began devaluing it. We started valuing efficiency. We started valuing, quantitative values. Of course, we valued the STEMs, and the STEMs have a very important role in education. But what I don't like, and I'll bring this up anecdotally on one of my social media feeds, there was an argument that broke out, and some of my STEM friends were ridiculing adjuncts in the humanities. And they were saying, well, if you were stupid enough to get into the field, you get what you deserve. And, I started thinking, well, why is pursuing my passion, be it philosophy, be it literature, be it poetry, be it theater, why is that now stupid? Why do I deserve to be disrespected for pursuing something that actually, as human beings, something that helps contribute to a culture, and I'm talking about a global culture, right, that sets us apart. What we give back through humanities is actually one of the most beautiful aspects of humanity. Okay, I study story and I teach story. And, I have, when I teach literature classes, I often ask my students, how would you define literature? And we have all kinds of lofty definitions. But my favorite definition is that literature is story. And why do we need story? Well, we've always had story. Our species thrives on story at the most basic level.
Well, the Bible.
Yes, from our religious beliefs to our cultural beliefs, how we learn not to touch a stove as a child, because at the most basic level, when you're telling a child, look, if you put your hand there, it's going to hurt, that's going to burn, that's a kind of rudimentary story. Stories are how we learn. Stories are how we tell people, I went out there gathering some mushrooms and I ran into a bad batch and they're poisonous. You don't want to eat those. Stories are ways in which we learn, and stories are also ways in which we facilitate a better world, because stories are how we understand people who are not ourselves. and, baseline humanities, it teaches us empathy. And I think that one of the things I find most distressing is we're no longer valuing a series of subjects and, roads into learning that can sort of cultivate more empathetic relationships between people. And I don't know that it's an accident that we're having more and more trouble with debating. We're having more and more trouble with facilitating complex conversations when we're at the same time devaluing the kinds of study that help us tease out the subtleties of opinions, of arguments, of learning to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. I mean, we're devaluing the humanities. You're right. And I have to listen to people make fun of the humanities and make fun of people who choose to go into the humanities, and I think it's tragic.
Well, I mean, isn't that okay, so Chris Hedges, I just read his last book, America, the Farewell Tour, and it's a dark-ass book. I mean, I love Chris Hedges, and I've read several of his books. This one is dark, but he makes that exact point that we're so divorced from compassion, and you see it all the time. Like you just mentioned, well, we don't know how to debate anymore. Some of the things that come out of people's mouths, especially online, because they're just neutral, right? They're just writing it, and that's how they feel, right? So, but we've gotten so divorced from compassion that there's no more small d democratic institutions anymore. We've killed the church, especially since 1976 when Jerry Falwell took it over with the GOP. And made it a right-wing political arm, which it didn't used to be. The labor unions would start out of the church. I mean, a lot of things started out of the church. So the church, college, the educational system, small d democratic system that we had before, it was the lowest common denominator. We all had a base reading level. We all had a base math skill. And now they're killing the public schools more and more and more. I personally believe that the Department of Education is a conspiracy. It was a subset of the Surgeon General's office up until 1981. And then it became the Department of Education, and education has just fallen into a hole over the last 30 odd years. The district I went to, Los Angeles Unified Schools, was a top 10 district when I was going to school. And the kind of education I got there, the level of teachers that we had there, I learned a lot in high school. And I look at kids, now, and I hate to sound like my dad, but it's like glorified vocational training. So we've killed the unions, and I'm talking small d democratic, not the party, but we've killed the unions, we've killed the church, we've killed colleges, turning them into ersatz tech schools with these austerity level student loans just to get an education. The fourth estate, which was the press, we've destroyed that. It's now one big corporate tongue bath gangbang. So what do you see? You're in the class, you're with people every day. And obviously, people that are taking your courses still give a shit about the humanities. They still give a shit about English. They still give a shit about philosophy. They still give a shit about Descartes, right? So how do we get that back on a macro level? How do we get that back when people, and especially supposed, Jesus-loving people, I beg your pardon, who are so fucking mean? We're in 8 wars right now, and no one seems to give a shit at the 1,000 people 900 miles away. We're sending 5,000 troops down to the border to turn that shit into the Gaza Strip. I mean, maybe you could have read Socrates or something. Maybe the allegory of the cave would be good for you to read. I'm like, I'm saying, you see this all the time, and I don't want to be all dark and gloomy or whatever. I just think when I say we're divorced of compassion, I don't think of everybody, but I say a good percentage of the society is divorced of compassion. Even the so-called liberal who buys into this happy horse shit. Oh, it's incremental. You got to move the football just a little bit. I'm tired of incrementalism. Lincoln freed the slaves in the 1860s. We were hanging black guys until the 1970s. So, I don't want to rant because I want you to. You're the expert. I want you to show me the error of my ways. But how do we start turning that ball around a little bit? Because right now, it's almost like if you decide to major in English, you're an idiot. If you decide to major in history or Russian, you're an idiot. I mean, do you know when that started?
Well, I mean, I think, okay, there are colliding influences here, and I'm no expert on this, but...
Wait, I'm sorry, say that again?
Teaching, I'm no expert here, but there are, in my mind, a lot of colliding influences, and I'm going to try to be as clear as I can. Right now, for one thing, we have a new generation of students who are coming in, and they're more cautious than previous generations for good reason. You know, they saw 2008.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And, you know, they're inheriting a world in which they see, you know, for one thing, article after article, that by 2040, we're all screwed, right? Paradise will be on fire. The earth, we're going to be in Mad Max land. They're trying very hard to figure out what is it that they can do to have a little bit of stability in their life. But there's also been a shift. I'm not sure about this, but this is my feeling. Because my students today, students coming into college today, are very savvy, very introspective, and they're very honest about, with themselves and with each other, about the role that technology has come to play in their lives. More so than, I think, older generations. Meaning they self-identify. You know, I'm on my technology too much. I'm using social media too much. I interface through my phone. Whatever. They're aware of it. They're not unaware at all. And we end up having a lot of these conversations about where did this come from? What does this mean? Because frankly, the younger generations, they're not the ones who created all these network technologies. We did, in fact, Generation X.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We're the ones who put it out there. And, you know, corporations clearly have made a lot of money doing this. And I think what's happened is, God, I'm not even sure. Oh, you mentioned Descartes. Okay, I'm going to go back a long time here. we need to recognize that what we do, all the new stuff that we do, isn't actually all that new. We need to go look way back. Go look back to the early 19th century. Look at how the networks of trains that we built and created changed the way we live, changed the world, fragmented our senses, fragmented our communities, fragmented how we did business, and started valuing speed, efficiency, productivity. In other words, where we are right now didn't just happen. We've been cultivating it over 2 centuries, and we've been using our technologies to do so. And, you know, we've become very good at making money for a few people. We've become very good at ensuring that, larger organizations can make a profit. And we've become very good at understanding that the bottom line is important, at least to those who kind of pull all the strings. And these networks of technologies have grown. I mean, I call this the digital verse now. None of us, we hardly ever connect anymore.
No, you're right.
Even, we don't have time. We can't even get to each other anymore. We don't sit down and have conversations. Studies are being done at University of Toronto that, most of our ability to empathize has to do with face-to-face expressions. Well, we're not looking at each other's faces when we're sending each other texts.
That's right.
Stanford was doing some experiments looking to see how efficient are we when we in fact do multitask, which is something that our technologies allow us to do now. We think we're operating thoughtfully. We think we're getting a lot done, but in fact, we're really not. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's so many things pouring into this current moment. I'm having a hard time trying to articulate exactly what the consequences are. The consequences are we've divided ourselves from each other. We've divided ourselves from the repercussions of our own actions. For example, it's easy to ghost people now, which is something that we, crazy 10, 20 years ago even.
Right.
And we've demanded that everybody plug in. like, in other words, we're not just dealing with us anymore. We're dealing with ourselves as kind of products of our technologies. Our technologies are no longer products of us. We are now products of our technology. So the efficiency and the success of the tech and the institutions that these technologies kind of come out of, they're more important than people. They're more important than individuals. And we might even be able to say, I mean, I'm not articulating this very well, that these larger forces have become more important than us. Well, and that might have a lot to do with what we're saying.
Well, I mean, and that's sort of a symptom of the failure of capitalism, isn't it? You know, people hate to. If you say that, it's like I said, fuck Jesus. I mean, they freak out. But capitalism fails every 4 to 10 years. And we just developed the opportunity in America to print money. And even with all the money we printed, we still didn't, we're still not out of the last banking crash, the mortgage crash. I mean, 40% of the world's wealth was lost there. And so, like to your point, when you said these kids see this and they freak out, I mean, it's almost like kind of like how the hippies failed us, right? I look at the hippies as having failed us. And we were Gen X, right? We were the kids that, grew up riding in the back of a Ranchero, 12 kids in a Ranchero to go to the drive-in, no helmets, no seat, no buckles, most of our moms smoked when they were pregnant, all this kind of crap in the 60s and 70s, right? But we kind of failed this next bunch of people coming up because it's our generation that created this shit, as you said, right? And so what ends up happening is we create all these technologies to the point where people are just lost in their fucking screens. I mean, moving here 3.5 years ago was kind of a revelation living in Austin compared to LA, because here, for example, it's a small enough town, about 2 million people if you count the outlying areas. It's small for us, being, you lived in New York, how long you lived in, and we were both of us were from Los Angeles. But when I moved here, the thing that kind of hit me like a thunderbolt within a month or two, because I only had 2 friends here, and they were both with kids and family and blah, blah, blah. So I saw them maybe every 10 days to 2 weeks, maybe. So I had to get out by myself. I was dating online and da-da-da-da. And, I was going to bars because I said, screw it. In LA, it's weird if you go to a bar by yourself. But here it's not.
Yeah.
Here it's not. Yeah. You walk in, bartender's, hey, man, what's up? You're chit-chatting with him, watching the game. There's a couple, oh, yeah, they're from Philly. And you meet new people. Within 3 weeks, I made a couple of friends that just by going to the bar by my house. And it's interaction. It was the old school, like the blacksmith knows the baker kind of thing. And now I'm out, not a ton, but 2-3 nights a week, getting like a little happy hour somewhere, a couple of bars by my house. I got a crew of guys that I know. And in LA, except for the guys that I knew who all got married and had kids that I barely saw the last decade I was there because they were all married with kids. And even one of my brothers just, he's dived into his kids. God bless him. That's life. That's a cycle of life. But you can't go to a bar in Los Angeles by yourself and not be weird. It's weird. Here you can. Nobody thinks about it. And I have an entire crew of friends out here now. And we sit down and we, bash stuff out and agree or not agree. But it's like, it's old school, face-to-face communication, kind of what you're saying, that gets taken away with all this technology. And how many places do you go where people just have their faces buried in their screen? And you hear this all the time to the point where it's almost a cliche. But this is exactly what some of our challenges are. The other day I was getting gasoline and I was at a 7-Eleven and I left my car at the pump to go pay inside. I had to wait in a line. And it was kind of busy. I don't pay at the pump because they hack your card. They always do. So the last couple of years I stopped doing that. Guess what? They stopped hacking my card. So, I'm coming out with my iced tea or whatever. And this lady's looking at me and she goes, that's very inconvenient of you to park there. And I said, well, I had to pay for gas. Well, why didn't you pay here? Because I don't want to get my card hacked. Well, that and she starts getting into this, how I impose on her life. And I just said, well, lady, when you create a perfect world, I'll be fucking glad to live in it. Can we stop this now? And the look on her face, and she's about my age. She wasn't like 12. And the look on her face was priceless because I could tell she's like used to dealing with people on a computer. She's not used to interacting with another human being, aside from the folks at work that she has to deal with. And when I said that, the way I said it, Maybe, I don't know how it sounded. I didn't care. I just said, listen, when you invent a perfect world, I'll fucking A live in it. Leave me alone. And I pumped my gas. And then she got in her car. I think she was afraid of me, which I kind of was embarrassed about. But I was like, God damn it. Like, when do we become so rude to one another? I gave you a logical answer and that wasn't enough, right? So it's like, when do we start getting, you know, we can't really go back. I guess the genie's out of the bottle. But when you talk about when you talk about the folks that are the kids are in your class and they're horrified by what you guys get paid and everything else. Not you, because thankfully you're in a different position. But what kind of conversations can we have with the general population? Because I believe this thing gets changed one conversation at a time, one podcast at a time, one vote at a time, right? But for some reason, we've demonized intellectual discourse in this country. I mean, is that off base to say?
It's not off base at all. But what gives me hope, what has kind of given me back some of my optimism, is literally the new generation of students that are pouring into colleges right now. They're incredibly aware that something's wrong. They're incredibly aware that everything's off. Just tonight, during a class earlier this evening, we were going around the room and people were talking about what they're doing their final research projects on. And after class, one of my students said to me, I just realized that I could categorize all of our research projects into 3 subjects that all add up to the end of the world. I started laughing. Oh my God, you're right. Because about a third of the class, they're all working on AI and machine learning research projects. A third of the class, they're all working on the effects of social media on our relationships, our abilities to speak to each other, our capacity for productive dialogue, and our propensity, our new vulnerabilities to new kinds of mental illness. And about a third of the class chose topics that have to do with climate change, the environment, and our inaction. I mean, these are student-driven topics. These are the topics that a humanities class has decided to pursue for their final project. These are all first-year college students. And that, to me, is incredibly hopeful. And the conversations that we've had in class, those are the kinds of conversations adjuncts, professors, educators in the humanities are able to facilitate. I mean, it's about conversations. It's about, keeping the door open to possibilities. Last year, about a year ago, I had a student, wonderful student, who said to me, he said, Sharmaine, because I asked my students to call me Sharmaine or Dr. Brown, but not Miss. Anyway, he said, Sharmaine, I don't know how to use facial expressions the way you do. How do you do that? And I really did not have any idea how to answer this question. And she told me that her mom had told her that her grandmother had complained that she couldn't tell when she was happy about a gift because she's no longer accustomed, the granddaughter, my student, to using her facial expressions to communicate how she's feeling. And she told me, these are her words, she said, I learned to use my words, but I haven't really learned how to use my face. And that, to me, was enlightening. That opened up a whole new area for me, an area that I'm trying to understand, because that's a product of new technologies that divide us. Where we get, somebody else recently said, quoted an aphorism, we spend all our days walking on eggshells so that we can go home and kind of get violent on our social media in the evenings. And we're losing our face-to-face. We're losing what you're talking about, in the town you're in now, meeting people and talking. And I think the conversations we need to be having are simply face-to-face conversations.
Right.
Because most of us most of us want things to get better. But it's when we have this what do you call it? A technological interface, we're losing some of that connection. And again, going back to the whole adjunct thing, this is why our college classrooms are important. Everybody gets an opportunity to talk, to sit in a circle and listen and look at each other and actually hash these things out. And we're not valuing that. We're not valuing the humanities at a time when we really need the humanities.
Well, let me ask you something, though.
More than ever.
Well, absolutely. No, more than ever, absolutely. But let me ask you a really quick question. And, we're almost wrapping up here, but let me ask you a really quick question. So, and you may not have felt this. Maybe the adjuncts don't. Maybe it's more of a tenure track position that feels this. But do you feel any pressure, or do you think there's any pressure? Because let's face it, if you're $1 million a year, $2 million a year president, you're out there chasing sponsorships. If you're a professor, chasing grants from Mobil Oil or whoever, how much pressure is put on? The other night, I was an absolute asshole. Surprise, surprise. And so, a friend of mine, I made some comment. A friend of mine said, he goes, well, I'm going to just go ahead and defer to my political professors in college. I said, really? I don't know who the fuck these guys are. They could be getting their dice blown by some freshmen while they're chasing a goddamn grant. I'm going to listen to Thomas Frank and Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges and Cy Hirsch. Those are my professors. I don't know who the fuck these guys are. And if you're telling me this baked in the brain happy horse shit, MSDNC crap, then I can only guess that you think the same way as they do. And how much pressure are they getting? How much pressure are they getting to teach their students this shit? So, there's the flip side to this too. It's like we've allowed our colleges to become glorified vocational schools, and these $2 million a year college presidents spend time making sure that, Sheldon Adelson gets a hospital named after him if he dedicates a ton of money. Well, he ain't going to do it if you're teaching, the humanities, or if you're teaching that, the Republicans have lost their way from being the progressive party that they once were in the 1800s, early 1900s. So do you see that pressure? Or is that something that I'm just off base on, or is that something you've actually maybe seen firsthand?
No, yeah, there is. I mean, unfortunately, there is that pressure. And I think it's something that it's something that I didn't think of before I got into academia. It's something I'm not sure we think about as a culture. There was a reason for tenure. And the reason for tenure was so that the pressure couldn't get to you.
You broke up. Repeat that again.
The reason that we used to have tenure, the reason professors used to be tenured, is that it kind of separated you from the pressures that would otherwise kind of push you in one direction or another. That was the reason for tenure. It wasn't about being an easy job. It wasn't about, it wasn't about just being protected for the sake of being protected. It wasn't about privilege. It was about freedom of thought and freedom of speech. One of the only ways that you can kind of get away from being pushed in one direction or another is if you do have a little bit of job security. Of course, that has a flip side negative as well. But we did once have that in academia, where you could have Noam Chomsky's teaching. I don't know that you can have a Noam Chomsky teaching right now, because if Noam Chomsky starts speaking in a classroom, Noam Chomsky, the new Noam Chomsky, is going to be out on his ass. Well,
that was my next question. When Noam Chomsky and Cornel West has quite a few more years. He's only 10 years older than me. But Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, when they go, it's over, isn't it? Because now everything that you said tenure was about is used in the reverse. Tenure is now used to blackmail you, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no security. I mean, we all get nervous. We all have to be careful. When we're adjuncts, we're expendable. We're literally, adjunct labor is called contingent. You're contingent. You're not necessary. You're not even in some schools. I was lucky at one of the schools I taught at. Everybody was wonderful to me, but at a lot of schools, you're not even invited to small events, let alone meetings. You're not part of a community, and you're pretty much out there on your own. So if you take a risk, you'll really be out on your ass. I mean, that's where we're at right now with education. That's where we're at.
Wow. Wow. Well, I mean, it just seems, I mean, I always try to catch myself. Part of me, I talk to my brother about this all the time. I got a brother that's close. He's about your age. He's 49. And we always talk about this crap. Like, I don't want to turn into my dad, and go, well, back in the day, but part of me, I talk to kids now, they're maybe 25, 30 years old. They're in the middle of a graduate program, a PhD program. It just doesn't seem like they're possessed of anything real philosophical past their vocation. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how emotionally attached a welder is to his craft, even though welding is important. But if you're going to be, and then more and more people I meet out here, I have not met yet one student here at UT that's majoring in something that's not a STEM deal. I mean, I meet graduate students all the time. I mean, 15, 20 of them probably at this point. They're chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, civic planning. No one's doing what you do. No one's doing what Dr. He hates when I say this, Dr. Chris Bray, who has a PhD in American history. No one wants to hear that. It's like, and maybe a doctorate is too lofty a goal, but what the hell ever happened to minoring in English? And it's like, if you're going to major in math, whatever happened to like minoring in philosophy, whatever at least happened to that? It just seems like we're just kicking that crap to the curb, and just the noise getting, it's just getting more and more drowned out, wouldn't you say?
Well, it is. Actually, one of the things I'm excited about right now, teaching at an art school, is that so many of the students are so passionate about what they're doing, because it's an art college, right? It's an art and design college. So students are here for their passions, which is incredible. I feel really lucky. But when I was at CUNY, one thing I was very proud of is how many STEM students would tell me, I just want you to know, Professor, I'm adding a minor in English because of your class. And that would make me really happy, because it does matter. It can be meaningful. And, if they're given, if we give educators the support to open up those avenues, a lot of students, right, they'll travel down those avenues, especially those who want to be doctors, who want to be scientists, who want to be engineers. A lot of them are really curious, but they don't have those opportunities to pursue that, and it's nice. It makes me happy when I hear that this person who's going to be going to med school, in fact, does want a minor in English, because poetry and empathy with this particular student seems important to a fulfilling medical practice. I really like to hear that. And I'm supposed to be teaching at an art school where a lot of students are really thoughtful about these things. I'd like to see more of that in the STEM.
Wait, say that last part again.
I'd like to see more of that in the STEM fields. I'd like, more students who are pursuing STEM careers to nonetheless remember that, the humanities are important.
Well, see, and
they are.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
They are connected.
100%. Well, you can't have all science, no philosophy, right? I mean, that's how you go to work at General Dynamics. That was the big employer when I was getting out of school, and I wanted to work in the record business. And my friends were like, "Oh, you're an idiot." I'm like, "Yeah, they kill people. They make shit that kills people. I don't want to work there, and I want to cut my hair." At the time, I had hair, and it was long, and I want to cut it. I'm like, well, where can I get a job where they won't make me cut my? I'm like thinking, well, the record business, and I was trying to get a record deal because I was in a band at the time. But back to, kind of piggybacking on that. As we kind of wrap up, because I see the challenge with a lot of what we're saying, kids don't want to pay for extra courses because they got to pay for it now. It's not like you paid $100 for 12 units when I was going to school, right? So if I got a minor in English, well, fuck, that's going to be more. So how is it that and we'll start to wrap up on this. How is it that we can give Donald Trump last year, the maniac that everyone's afraid of, give him $80 billion more than he asked for in his defense budget last year and this year? Because here's the magic number. If I wanted to pay for school for everybody, that's $70 billion a year. When I say that, I want a pony. However, every Democrat pretty much in the House of Reps, I think except for 30, and every senator, including Bernie, because he's from Vermont, a big defense state, they all voted. They just went right along with it. They gave Cheeto Jesus a $80 billion tip on top of his defense budget. But, oh my God, free college. Are you crazy? Russia's defense budget is $65 billion a year. Ours is $1.2 trillion a year. Oh, and Russia has single-payer health care. All right, so the Democrats go fuck themselves. So in wrapping up, what are your thoughts on refocusing our energies to make sure that schools, even private schools, if we could subsidize private schools, for example, or the students rather, so they could afford to take some of these classes, so that we maybe make a required minor. Hey, listen, let's mitigate the fact that you may be an asshole by the time you're my age. How about we teach you a little philosophy? How about a little history? How about a little English? I don't know. You read a little Fitzgerald, and if you're taught the right way, you might absorb some of what those words have to say. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of,
I had a conversation with somebody in med school who said that one of the requirements, or his pre-med requirements, included poetry.
Wow.
And I think that is, one of the most productive and beautiful requirements that we could make possible. Being able to read closely, being able to read literature, being able to read poetry, being able to appreciate art, taking a class in art history, all of this is about critical thinking. All of this is about, cultivating compassion, cultivating empathy. And ironically, I think we've fallen into a chasm of a lot of emotional reasoning today in our culture. And emotional reasoning doesn't always give us the most empathetic or compassionate solutions. But critical thinking does. And this is what the reading of literature and the appreciation of art and music can, in fact, instill in all of us, no matter what we're pursuing. And so, yeah, I think it's really, even if we don't make it a requirement, we present it as a viable option, and we encourage it. We encourage students to please to do, and they shouldn't be charged more money for it. And you know what? We need public education that is accessible to everybody.
Right.
No matter how much money they have available to them. I mean, that needs to be a requirement.
No, I 100% agree. Well, listen, on that note, we're going to have to start wrapping up. It's been about an hour. Didn't it fly by? I told you it would. But folks.
Well, I appreciate the conversation and the opportunity to talk about some of these issues.
No, I'm glad you came on. I'm finally glad to get you on. I know you've been very, very busy, so it's seriously a blessing to have you on. I'd love to have you come back on again. And folks, our guest has been Dr. Sharmaine Browne. And I know some of this stuff might bring ire to your life, or if that's a good use of the word. But again, patreon.com/The Bitter Truth if you want to be a bitter pill. And you could do that, support the show. Otherwise, you can obviously listen to it on Stitcher and iTunes and Spotify and all the usual suspects. We're everywhere. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.